While I was studying full-time last year, I was told that I had to pay rent, but then they asked for 40% of my salary to cover the mortgage of the house. My mind couldn't process the information. The first thing I thought about was how my money was going to something that didn't benefit me directly. I told them I would be happy to pay my share of the bills, contribute to the house, cook, and do whatever was needed, but they insisted this was to teach me how much life costs. Honestly, I didn't understand what they were trying to achieve with that lesson. By that point, I had already saved up to buy a used car, paid for registration, insurance, my food, my phone, furniture for my room, and everything I needed to survive as an adult. I had done it all on my own, without asking for anything in return. They hadn't contributed a single cent since I started earning my own money, and the worst part was that I felt guilty for wanting to do things my way. I felt so confused and honestly, utterly helpless. I couldn't understand how I could be such an ungrateful daughter when all I was asking for was a little understanding of my situation. It wasn't that I didn't want to learn about life, but I was already learning in a way that seemed far more valuable to me, taking responsibility for my own expenses, my decisions, my choices. The money they were asking for, the mortgage, was what I had earmarked from my savings, the money I had worked so hard to earn while studying and working part-time. My life wasn't easy, but I had managed to keep my finances balanced, and now I was being asked to risk them for a lesson I didn't feel I needed. Additionally, I had just lost my job because my class schedule no longer matched the shift they were offering. I had been actively looking for another job, but the truth is, it wasn't easy to find something while studying full-time. I felt completely defeated after receiving so many rejections. My self-esteem dropped every time I saw how easily others were getting jobs while I was only facing closed doors. It was at that moment I started feeling trapped, as if no matter how hard I tried, things just weren't going right. Despite my desperation, they still expected the rent every month. I couldn't afford it without touching my savings, so the only option I saw was to give them a good chunk of what I had already saved. My heart hurt every time I saw my plans crumble. None of my friends were paying rent, especially while studying. They were even charging rent to my brother, who was receiving unemployment benefits from the government. That seemed so absurd to me, but it also made me question the logic my parents were applying to all of this. What kind of lesson were they trying to teach me when they didn't even understand how to manage their money? Still, they insisted that life costs money and that the best thing I could do was learn to live with the difficulties of adult life. But I wasn't living adult life yet. I was still in the transition phase, trying to find my way. So I asked if we could reduce the rent percentage, maybe to 30% of my income, to make things more manageable. They flatly refused. They told me I was ungrateful, that I didn't understand what it meant to work hard for what I had, and that it didn't matter if I was studying full-time. According to them, this was how life worked. One had to adapt to the circumstances and never expect things to be solved by magic. All I wanted was a little help, not everything solved. But I felt so powerless, so small in the face of that impossibility of receiving support from those I expected it from. My mind began to fill with doubts about what I was doing, wondering if it really was so difficult for them to let me breathe a little. I felt like my parents never understood what was going on in my head or what I was sacrificing to keep myself afloat. I started to think that maybe the solution was to move out. Maybe it was time to take the step and find my own space where I could be myself without having to face those constant expectations of being the perfect daughter who always agreed with everything. I needed a place where I could think without constantly feeling suffocated by the expectations of others. Somehow, I knew it wasn't just about money. It was about finding my own peace of mind. I felt emotionally drained and physically exhausted because the stress was affecting me more than I had realized. My parents didn't know how hard it was for me to deal with the situation or how alone I felt. They had it hard in their 20s when they started having children, and I grew up in an environment where things weren't easy, but there was no room to talk about how difficult it was to be young in that context. They made their living as artists, relying on government subsidies and odd jobs. We never had luxuries or the things that others took for granted. I remember when I was a kid at school, I always had to wear clothes sewn by my mom, and my friends would make fun of my shoes that weren't in style. Sometimes I'd get lunchboxes that were empty or with the bare minimum, and I didn't realize what I was missing until I saw others share their experiences. Years later, when I was grown up, they were able to buy a house with an inheritance they received, a rather expensive house, and my mom got a part-time job. Things seemed to be improving, but despite that, the emotional distance between them and me didn't go away. My dad became a manager at a company, bought a new car, and everything seemed better, but for me, the relationship with them remained distant. I felt like they never understood me. The new house, the material possessions didn't make me feel like we were any closer. They only made me feel more disconnected, as if their lives no longer aligned with mine. There were so many unresolved things, so many silences, that I began to question how much it was worth maintaining the relationship that way. My thoughts would cloud every time I tried to remember those happy moments from my childhood. Maybe they never existed, or maybe I was so affected by the lack of emotional connection that I couldn't even remember them clearly. For a moment, I thought that moving out would be the solution, but at the same time, I felt so broken that I didn't know if I would be able to find a new home within myself. I finally moved out at the end of the year. The decision was difficult, but I felt relieved to start a new chapter. And as I packed my things, I wondered if my life would really improve completely, or if the same old emotional wounds would keep dragging me down. However, what I longed for most was to find myself outside of that environment that had left me with so many scars. The change of environment allowed me to see things from a new perspective, but it also brought with it a mix of emotions I didn't know how to handle. During the move, I couldn't help but think about what I was leaving behind. My old house, though full of tensions and disagreements, still represented something familiar, something I knew well. At first, I was excited about the idea of having my own space, of not having to answer to anyone but myself. But as the days passed, the loneliness began to set in. The initial excitement faded quickly, leaving me with the uncertainty of whether I had made the right decision. At first, my life in the new apartment seemed promising. I felt more independent, more free. Every corner of my new home was carefully decorated, reflecting my personal taste. But that freedom, which in theory should have been a relief, became a constant pressure. The constant need to balance studying, work, and finances was overwhelming. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking about bills, upcoming payments, and how little I had managed to save due to the constant pressure of paying my part of the rent. I started to realize that the move hadn't solved my problems. It had only temporarily camouflaged them. The fact of being away from home gave me a break, but it also made me feel even more distant from my parents. I could no longer hide behind the walls of their house, where discussions and expectations mixed with the uncomfortable silence that always filled the spaces. Now, I was alone with my thoughts and emotions, and I didn't know if I was becoming stronger or more vulnerable. Loneliness was affecting me in ways I hadn't anticipated. During the first few weeks, I threw myself into my studies with more determination than ever. It felt like my only distraction. My days were filled with books and assignments, but as time went on, I realized that my efforts weren't enough to fill the emotional void that haunted me. The days became monotonous, and although I had made some attempts to socialize, I felt that most people didn't understand my situation. My life seemed to be at a standstill, and conversations with my friends felt increasingly superficial. Family gatherings, or the lack of them, also became a recurring theme in my mind. I had started to accept that my parents and I had a distant relationship, but I still didn't understand why. I wondered if my independence had created a barrier between us, or if, on the contrary, my need to be close to them had been rejected so sharply that now I didn't even know how to approach them without feeling uncomfortable. The questions about my finances, the rent, the mortgage, all of that had gone beyond the material. There were questions about what was expected of me, about how I should behave as a daughter, about how our interactions should be in adulthood. And all of this confused me more than ever. Although I felt calmer being away from the constant pressure of being under their roof, I also realized that, in a sense, I had distanced myself from the person I used to be. I had changed in such a way that I no longer knew how to reconcile that version of myself with what my parents expected me to be. The transition to adulthood had made me more aware of the emotional gaps in my family, and the more I tried to connect with them, the more I felt as if I were touching something intangible, something that slipped away every time I tried to hold on to it. My mother, for her part, seemed more distant than ever. Although her financial situation had improved, her attitude hadn't changed. She still approached life the same way, always thinking life was a harsh lesson that had to be learned through adversity. Meanwhile, my father seemed more focused on his personal achievements than on our relationship. He didn't have time to look back, to reflect on what he had left behind. In a way, I felt invisible to both of them, as if I could never fit into their vision of what a grown-up daughter should be. During those weeks, I also encountered something unexpected. A feeling of resentment began to grow inside me, something I had never experienced before. The way my parents had handled my growth, the way they decided to teach me lessons I hadn't asked for, made me question whether they really knew me. Why did they feel the need to impose their version of life on me instead of supporting me and finding my own? Even though my life seemed pretty organized on the outside, inside, I was in a constant struggle to find a balance between the independence I so desired and the relationship with my parents, which, despite my efforts, had never been completely healthy. The question of whether I should keep trying to get closer to them or if I really had to cut ties once and for all began to linger in my mind. I had reached a point where the internal conflict was so strong that I didn't know if what I really wanted was to be close to them, or if I just wanted to free myself from the expectations and demands that made me feel constantly inadequate. My life in the new apartment, though calm, was filled with doubts. Was this the independence I had always dreamed of? Was this the future they had promised me? Or perhaps the reality was much more complex, and I was only beginning to realize what it really meant to live on my own. I felt like there were so many decisions to make, so many pieces of myself that needed to be reorganized, but at the same time, a sense of paralysis kept me trapped in an emotional limbo. I decided to take some time to reflect. Maybe what I needed was a pause in the midst of all the chaos I had left behind. Adult life didn't come with an instruction manual, and although sometimes I wished I could fit into my parents' expectations, I knew that was no longer possible. I couldn't keep allowing their opinions to define my path. Even though I wasn't sure what the future held, at least I had come to the conclusion that my freedom, as difficult as it was the only way I could find my own peace. A few more weeks passed in my new home, and life continued its course in a somewhat unexpected way. Although the days became more routine, something inside me kept searching for answers. Sometimes I would wake up with the feeling that something was about to change, as if there were a door open to a future I still couldn't understand. But every time I tried to approach that door, I felt like I was being pulled back by an invisible weight, something related to my past, to what I had left behind. During the first few weeks of my move, I thought everything would be easier. After all, I had made the choice to become independent, to take control of my life. But I quickly realized that independence wasn't just about paying your own bills or choosing how to decorate your walls. Independence also means facing your deepest fears, the insecurities I thought I had already overcome. In every corner of my apartment, I found small questions that, although they seemed trivial, accumulated in my mind. Am I really capable of living alone? Can I be happy without the constant pressure from others? How am I supposed to move forward when the answers don't seem clear? One afternoon, while doing groceries at the supermarket, I ran into an old friend from college. She was with her mother, and the scene made me feel something strange, a mix of nostalgia and sadness. She had always had a close relationship with her parents, something I had never experienced in the same way. As I greeted her, she asked me how I was doing, and without thinking, I told her how I had been feeling. I didn't expect her to fully understand, but she seemed genuinely concerned, and that made me think. During that conversation, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with my own independence issues, but I was also carrying a family history that weighed on me more than I had thought. When we said goodbye, I kept thinking about what she had told me. Sometimes what we need most is to learn to let go of what holds us back. She had said, referring not only to family ties, but to everything I had learned throughout my life, everything my family had taught me. It was a piece of advice that resonated with me for days, but it also left a bitter taste, because letting go meant, in a way, letting go of part of myself. Letting go of the image I had formed of what my relationship with my parents should be, what I had believed I should do to be accepted. My conversations with friends also became deeper. Although everyone seemed to have their own struggles, there was something common amongst all of them, the search for a life that wasn't defined by the expectations of others. It seemed like each one of us, in our own way, was trying to find a balance between what we wanted to be and what others expected of us. But for some reason, I couldn't find that balance. Maybe my independence was just a facade, an attempt to fit into something that wasn't really me. Or maybe what I needed wasn't independence, but connection, a sense of belonging I had never fully had. As the weeks went by, I started to feel more tired, but not physically. It was a mental fatigue, an exhaustion that didn't go away with sleep or rest. I found myself constantly thinking about what I had left behind, about what I had lost, about the decisions I had made. I had made the decision to move, yes, but was it the right one? I questioned whether I was really searching for what I wanted or if I had just moved away from familiarity to avoid facing what was inside me. One afternoon, while walking through the park near my apartment, I ran into an elderly couple who used to walk there every day. I knew them by sight. They always walked together, talking quietly among themselves. At that moment, something in their conversation caught my attention. The woman was talking to her husband about memories of their youth, of the difficult times they had been through, and how they had managed to overcome those difficulties. I was surprised by how, despite the years and adversities, they still walked together, sharing every moment. The phrase that stuck with me the most was when she said to him, "Life isn't just what happens to you, it's how you choose to live with it." It was such a simple and profound reflection that made me think that maybe I was complicating things too much. I returned home with that thought in my mind, and although I didn't have all the answers, something inside me began to change. Maybe I didn't need to find the big solution to everything, but simply learn to live with what I had been dealt. Learn to coexist with uncertainty, frustration, and the doubts that constantly lingered. Not everything in life has a clear answer, and maybe not everything I had experienced needed to be a lesson. Sometimes what one needs is time, space to breathe, and perhaps finding the small joys in the chaos. That night, while preparing dinner in my apartment, I began to reflect on everything that had happened so far. My relationship with my parents, my independence, expectations, insecurities. Everything seemed to be intertwined in a way I couldn't undo, but maybe that wasn't the important thing. What I did know was that although I still didn't have all the answers, I was closer to understanding what it really meant to live for me. The path to self-understanding wasn't easy, and I would surely continue to face moments of doubt and confusion, but I no longer felt like I was walking in the dark. Little by little, I began to allow myself the opportunity to let go of the pressure to have everything figured out. Maybe my true struggle wasn't finding a definitive answer, but learning to navigate uncertainty, accepting that not everything has to be under control. The process of growing up, of becoming independent, isn't linear. There's no one way, no single way to do it, and that, in a way, gave me some peace. As time passed, I began to see things differently. My life, though still full of uncertainties, was starting to take shape. At first, the weeks slid by, one after the other, with nothing much standing out other than my daily routines. But as time went on, I began to notice small details that gave me hope. like when the rays of the sun came through my window in the morning, filling my room with a soft, warm light. It was in those moments when I finally found some peace. Despite the emotional ups and downs, my days in the apartment felt more and more like a refuge. It was the only place where I could truly be myself, where my thoughts could flow uninterrupted without the constant feeling of being observed or judged. However, I also realized that no matter how much my apartment was a refuge, there was a part of me still looking for something more, something I couldn't find in the white walls and the messy tables. It wasn't about belonging to any specific place, but finding a purpose beyond the expectations of others. The fact that my relationship with my parents was in a constant state of tension didn't help at all. Every time I tried to put into words what I was feeling, I felt incomplete, as if my thoughts were too chaotic to be understood. Sometimes I thought the disconnection with them was irreversible, but then in moments of stillness, I began to wonder if there was something deeper I hadn't yet seen. Maybe in their own way, they were also trying to learn how to be parents to someone who was no longer a child, someone who didn't need their constant guidance, but their understanding. Months went by, and as winter gave way to the brightness of spring, I realized that the seasons reflected much of what was happening inside me. The rigidity of winter had given way to the softness of spring, and although traces of the cold days remained, the first flowers began to open, as if signaling that it was time to leave behind the moments of darkness. But that transition wasn't easy. Like nature, my own process of change was slow and filled with internal resistance. The pressure to find immediate answers still weighed on me. Work, studies, payments, the lack of a clear purpose, everything seemed like a whirlwind of endless tasks. Although I had managed to find some financial stability, I still felt like I was walking on a tightrope. The fear of failure, of not meeting the expectations I had placed on myself, was ever present. It reminded me every time I sat down at my computer or every time I received a rejection on a job application. But something began to change in the way I approached difficulties. I started seeing each rejection as an opportunity, even though it took me a while to get to that point. Instead of feeling defeated, I decided I could learn something from each situation that put me in a tight spot. I realized that not everything had to be perfect. I didn't have to be the ideal person, the perfect daughter, the exemplary student. I could be enough by simply moving forward and doing the best I could at each moment. My independence began to be seen from a different perspective. Although at first the idea of being autonomous terrified me, now I understood that independence wasn't just about being alone, but about taking control over the decisions that shaped my life. At first, I thought independence meant not needing anyone. Now I understood that being independent wasn't about rejecting help from others, but knowing when to accept it and when to follow my own path. It was more an act of self-understanding than rejection of the world. Meanwhile, my parents still didn't fully understand my need for independence. But for some reason, that no longer hurt as much. I had begun to accept that they, like me, were trying to find their own way. Maybe not every day would be easy, nor would all conversations be comforting, but that didn't mean I couldn't find ways to connect with them in my own way. It wasn't about seeking approval, but about learning to share what was in my heart in a more genuine way. Every time I found myself in a conversation with them, it became easier to make myself heard. I no longer sought so much their approval, nor their unsolicited advice, but simply their understanding. The relationship with them transformed, although not in the direction I expected. Sometimes it seemed like our conversations stayed on the surface, in those family topics we avoided delving into. But sometimes, when we were alone, I felt like we were, in some way, touching something deeper, something that only time could reveal. My time in the apartment became a space for exploration. I no longer saw the days with the same urgency with which I had looked at them at first. There was something in the routine, something in the repetitive that gave me comfort. Like when I walked to the supermarket and noticed that despite walking the same path every day, each step taught me something new, not only in the landscapes around me, but in myself. I had started asking deeper questions I had previously avoided because I feared not having the answers. One day, while having coffee on the terrace of my apartment, watching the comings and goings of people on the street, I realized that in some way, we are all searching for the same thing, a reason to be here, a reason to keep going, something that makes us feel that our lives are worth it. No one has all the answers, nor are all days easy, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living them. That idea began to sink deeper into me. Life wasn't perfect, and I wasn't either, but that didn't mean I couldn't enjoy the little things, the small moments of clarity that appeared when I least expected them.
Spring continued its course, and with it, I too was changing, though in a subtle way. It wasn't a drastic transformation, but rather a series of small adjustments in how I saw the world. Every conversation, every moment of solitude, every challenge was leading me to something I still couldn't define clearly. But I felt it, that feeling that I was moving forward, that each day I was getting a little closer to understanding what I truly wanted from life, even if I still didn't know how to achieve it. Time had passed, and although at first I felt lost in my own emotional chaos, in the end, I had reached a point of understanding about who I was and what I wanted for my life. It wasn't easy nor quick. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and loneliness, but all of that was part of the growth process. In some way, what had started as an internal struggle, a constant tug of war between my desires and my fears, had culminated in a quiet peace I never imagined I would find. Looking back, everything seemed much clearer. Independence wasn't just the concept I had pursued, but a fundamental part of who I had become. I no longer felt the need to please others nor to seek approval at every step I took. My decisions, although not always perfect, were mine. I had learned to listen to myself, to give space to my emotions, to allow myself to fail without punishing myself for it. I had stopped fighting against my nature, to accept what I was with all my imperfections. The relationship with my parents had also reached a point of acceptance. After so many arguments, misunderstandings, and uncomfortable silences, I had understood that I couldn't expect them to change or understand everything that had gone through my mind. I had tried to make them understand, but the truth was that my life was no longer the same as theirs. My parents had done the best they could, but they too were learning to cope with the distance, with the changes. Sometimes love isn't expressed the way we expect, and that's something I had slowly started to understand. Their expectations no longer hurt, nor did their words full of unsolicited advice. Now I understood that we all had our own way of living, and although our ways of relating were different, that didn't mean we didn't love each other. My days in the apartment had become a peaceful refuge, though not without challenges. There were times when I still felt the weight of loneliness, but it didn't scare me as much anymore. I had learned to enjoy those moments of stillness. The silence was no longer an enemy, but an opportunity to reconnect with myself. During those moments, I would sit by the window and watch the world outside. People walking down the street, the lights of cars, the sounds of the city, all of that reminded me that life goes on, that no matter how solitary or uncertain my situation might seem, there is always something beyond, something that continues its course. I had decided that I didn't want to keep looking for definitive answers, that I didn't want to keep fighting against the inevitable. Life wasn't made of clear answers and easy solutions, but of moments, decisions made over time, steps into the unknown. I learned to accept that I wouldn't always have everything figured out, but that didn't make me less capable. Sometimes it's just about moving forward, step by step, not knowing where the path will lead us, and that was okay. One afternoon, while having coffee at my kitchen table, I decided it was time for a change. I no longer wanted to hold on to the idea that I needed something more to be happy. No more expectations, no more pressures. It was time to let go of everything that weighed me down. I looked around, at my books, at the walls I had filled with photos of moments that still brought me nostalgia, and I knew I had reached the end of a cycle. I was ready to give myself the chance to live fully, without any more burdens from the past. The day I decided it was time to return to my parents' house was one of the hardest, but also the most liberating. I knew I had overcome my fears, and that although things wouldn't be the same as before, I had reached a place where I no longer needed their approval to feel good about myself. My relationship with them would be different, but I was ready to embrace that change with calmness. When I arrived at my parents' house, I felt a mix of nervousness and relief. I was eager to talk, to explain to them how I had felt all this time, but I knew that what mattered wasn't so much what I said, but how I said it. I no longer sought the approval or understanding that I had once longed for. I just wanted to be heard. And when we sat at the kitchen table, sharing a meal together like in the old days, there were no grand words, just a silence filled with understanding, a look that said everything that needed to be said. My mother, seeing me sitting there, softly said, "We've watched you grow, and although we don't always understand your decisions, we support you." That moment, so simple yet so significant, was all I needed to hear. There was no need for endless explanations or justifications. Acceptance had arrived not in words, but in the stillness of that moment. My father, with his wise and calm gaze, nodded, as if everything had become clear between us. No more words were necessary. We had reached a mutual understanding, one that no longer depended on meeting each other's expectations. Over time, visits to my parents' house became more frequent, but not with the same emotional burden as before. I felt at peace, not because things were perfect, but because I had stopped expecting them to be. My life was no longer about seeking approval or recognition from others. I had learned to be at peace with myself, to stop clinging to the expectations of others or my own. I had understood that happiness was not found in perfection, but in accepting who I am, what I am capable of being, and what I want to be. At last, I had found my place, not in the world of others, but in my own. Love. The word multiplied in pockets, as if the tables had speakers, and there was a beat of confusion before the music dipped on instinct. The sax player set his horn on the chair. Next came Andreas's breathing, recognizable by that faint whistle when he keeps his voice low. "Not here," he said. "Not here," she echoed, and something hit wood. Not like an accident, but like a beat. A utensil clinked on the intern's table. HR stared at her phone like it was a new animal. The CEO raised his hand for silence that already existed. I was 3 tables away, but felt him at my shoulder. "Maria found out. Don't say her name." A knife stopped mid-slice at sales. Valentina searched for me with her eyes. I didn't move. The audio went on. The quality was clean, free of WhatsApp grime. "You promised," Lucia said. "One last time, and tomorrow we fix it." Andres' voice dropped to the frequency that used to make me believe him. "There's a board session. Don't be cruel. We'll sort us out after." She laughed without joy. "Us is what we do when you turn your phone off. You two is a statement. A silence. The blue one's in the closet, he said. Don't mix it up. Someone in the back whispered, God. The audio ended with a click of a door. The chat showed audio-203. A second message appeared. Same hotel admin. We apologize for the interruption. We had a recording device issue in a room. Please continue your evening. No one continued. Device fell like hail. Andres stood, wearing the put out the fire posture he loved for feeling needed. Lucia looked at the door, calculated exits, chose to stay. I set my glass down and walked toward the service corridor. Valentina followed. Don't go alone, she said, catching up. Tell me what you need. To be believed with no conditions, I said, and to let you hear it again if needed. I heard it, she said, and I have eyes. We stepped into the back hallway. It smelled like detergent and mint. In order, without witnesses. Rosa emerged from a door with a basket of towels, solemn, decisive. It isn't me, she said before I could speak, but I know who ran that chat. Maintenance lead, Maxi. His phone went missing yesterday on the ground floor. Said he left it at the charging station. Reported it, but it was reactivated today. Someone's using his account. Who can access the sound room, I asked. Anyone with the key to tech, Rosa said. And 2 members of your events team, Lucia and Andres, Valentina said, flat. And the coordinator, me, I added, with a faith that was running out of places to live. But that chat isn't ours. Someone pushed it through the hotel system so everyone would hear it, even guests outside our group. What are you going to do? Valentina asked. Find the phone and open cabin 12 without the game. We returned to the hall, but I didn't go to the table. I went behind the stage into the corridor to the tech room. The padlock sat looped through the handle, but not shut. Inside, a console, blinking in neat rows, a rack of routers, the warm dust smell of electronics. On a coil box lay a phone in a black case with a wrinkled label, Maxi. The screen showed the Valle Escondido production chat with the audio fired at 9 exactly. I powered it down and slipped it into my bag. On the lower shelf, a key dabbed with blue nail polish hung from a nail. I pocketed the key. Instead of heading straight to the cabin, I climbed the stage. The sax player watched like he expected a cue. I took the mic. My voice didn't shake. Technical issue resolved, I said. Apologies. Dinner continues. Please keep phones away. Any official communication will be delivered in writing. The CEO nodded, grateful for the tone, if not the content. Valentina, at the family table, met my gaze and lowered hers slowly, laying a path. Andres took 2 steps forward. Lucia moved with him. I set the mic down and headed for the side exit. Sandra slid in front of me, barely. No theatrics. Need backup? She asked. Stay close to Valentina, and if anyone heads for tech, alert me. If anyone goes uphill to 12, don't stop them. Just look hard. Got it, she said, smiling with clenched jaw, the kind that happens with bone, not soul. Night made a rectangle of cold air in the garden. Low path lights cut shadows at the knees. I walked without hurry, blue key weight in my pocket, each step landing where it hurt. The row of cabins looked unchanged. A bent pine, tired paint, a sleeping curtain. I opened, ocean fresh spray still sat like an alibi. I switched on a lamp and went straight to the closet. On the top shelf lay a blue suitcase, waiting with the patience of the inevitable. I pulled it down. The tiny lock clicked on a zip. It didn't weigh like clothes. It weighed like paper. I raked drawers till I found a length of wire. Bent it, popped the lock. Inside, blue and white folders, a cloth pouch with sticky notes, a manila envelope bearing our company logo, contracts with half signatures, vendor lists, a staging diagram with handwriting that wasn't mine. In a corner, a crude sketch of a key. At the bottom, a digital audio recorder with a micro SD card. I pressed play. The same breathing, the same cushioned laugh, but this time with dates. The counter showed 0000 under 12-2358. The latch moved. I didn't turn. Andres eased the door shut. Don't, I said, eyes on the recorder. Don't you, he answered. Stay out of what you don't understand. You're committing crimes. I'm reading the schedule, I said. It says key. A doodle. Someone found it cute to hide it. You don't know what you're doing.
I'm reading dates. I'm hearing your voice. I'm touching your shortcuts. Look, he said, that word in his mouth, the start of a hostage bargain. We can fix this. Nobody wants to hurt you. Lucia's scared, I'm furious, and you're losing it. Give me the card. I delete everything, we toast, and tomorrow we talk, okay? No. You're shooting yourself in the foot. I'd rather limp than kneel. It took him a second to understand I wasn't there to negotiate. He stepped in, grabbed the suitcase by the handle. I pulled too. It fell open. Papers flew like pigeons. He bent to gather them. I slid the card from the recorder and tucked it into my bra. He looked up, read the motion, smiled with schoolyard spite, spoke my full name like we were strangers. Mireya, don't make me. I never could, I said. He laced his fingers, moved in like to hug, and shoved me to the bed's edge. Not a hit. Trained. Clean. The push of someone who knows where force stops before damage. I caught the mattress and didn't fall. He stacked folders against his chest. This isn't yours, he said. It belongs to the company. If you remove it, I press charges. Then call the CEO to come take his suitcase, I said. I'll be here with the card. His face shifted in the bone, not the skin. He set the folders on the bed and stepped toward me. A voice outside halted him. Don't go in together, Valentina said. If there's going to be a scene, let there be witnesses. Lucia stood behind her, Sandra, a few meters back, pretending to be on the phone. 2 managers lingered with the excuse of fresh air. Andres looked at his sister with anger and a plea. Go, Vale, he said. No,
she answered. Not tonight. Lucia stepped just inside, calculating the angle of innocence. This got out of hand, she said. It wasn't supposed to be like this. It was, I said. You just didn't plan it. She looked at the suitcase, understood too much, hand to mouth, then down again, choosing to live inside her own plot. Andres, tell the truth, she said. About the contracts, the key, the vendor who wanted commission to pull him out of the bid. Valentina stared at me. Sandra stopped pretending. Managers looked at each other, auditing their risk. Andres breathed as if air turned to ice. He shoved the suitcase at me. Keep it, he said. Keep it and let's all go under. No, Valentina said. We won't go under for what you did. I did nothing, he fired back. Automatic, subjectless, the verb frayed. You made audios, I said. You made appointments. You made a suitcase. You drew a map for 2. Now we make an inventory. Valentina stepped in and gathered a fist of papers. Sandra moved between Andres and the door. Lucia backed up till she touched the wall. I breathed again, slow. I pulled out my phone and called the CEO. He arrived with HR, the company lawyer, and the hotel coordinator, sweating, holding an empty phone case. There were no screams. There was protocol. Photos of the suitcase, ad hoc folio numbers, a chain of custody built with napkins because no forms existed. The lawyer asked for the audios. I handed over the recorder and told him where I'd hidden the card. Valentina stayed beside me while I signed a handwritten note. Temporary receipt of material for internal investigation. Andres stared at the ceiling and aligned his anger around an idea. You're building a case, he said. This is HR's vendetta. This is your voice discussing commissions, HR said. This is your ex scheduling hotel appointments. This is a device from our plant acting like your mailbox. And this, she pointed at the suitcase, is stupidity. Lucia opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't mean. No verb came. No one asked you, Valentina said, without hate. The hotel manager apologized for the broadcast and promised to trace the maintenance account. Rosa appeared quiet in the doorway. She met my eyes, confirming a rope hadn't snapped. I nodded once. The lawyer requested a room for quick interviews. We moved to a small meeting room near reception. The interview was a tunnel without adjectives. Dates, times, names, descriptions. Where were you? Who saw? Whose clock matched the corridor camera? I spoke without repeating myself, with a precision that surprised me. At the end, the lawyer asked to inspect my phone to certify the unknown number's messages. I showed the thread. He photographed with the corporate handset, returned mine, scribbled something, said thank you, with no inflection. I stepped out and leaned 1 second on cold tile. The hotel sounded like washed plates and wind. Valentina approached. Wanna leave? I've got the car. Not yet, I said. I have to close the schedule and return the keys. You don't have to finish the event. Yes, I said. I have to finish my work. We returned to the hall. The room lay in a strange peace, like after a storm cut with a knife. People who knew and pretended not to, people who didn't and pretended they did. The sex player was back, shorter notes, as if his breathing had changed. I asked the tech to bring up the general lights. Andres was gone. So was Lucia. Sandra tipped her head toward the terrace. Outside, 2 small silhouettes under a lamp. For a second, I pictured them still seeking each other, still believing they could edit themselves. I looked away. I finished dinner as if I'd started it today, announced the menu, thanked the kitchen, passed the mic to managers who used Baroque words to mean we go on. At 11:30, the CEO spoke. He said little. An investigation was underway. The retreat would continue with minor changes. Gratitude for the team's composure. Composure got invented on the spot, with the discipline of people who know how to return to their keyboards after a fire. Close to dawn, as buses began shuttling those who didn't want to stay the night, I was still at reception handing in a box of wristbands, a bag of markers, a wireless mic that ended under a tablecloth. Rosa rolled off an elevator with a cart of sheets. She smiled a millimeter and placed a tiny plastic pouch on the counter. Inside, a small crescent earring. Blue. Found in 12, she said. Maybe it's yours? No, I said, but I'll keep it. Police came for the phone, she added low. Don't know what they'll say. I only know Maxie's account wasn't opened from the device. Someone used the web app. Thank you, I said. Rest. I kept the earring in my pocket and went up to my room. I didn't sleep. Sitting on the bed's edge, shoes on, I watched the wall and let my body notice what I'd done. At 6, I went down to coordinate breakfast. At 8, HR asked for another copy of vendor lists. At 9, the lawyer told me Andres had been suspended pending investigation. At 9:05, Valentina hugged me without a word. At 9:10, Lucia left a card at reception with a line on the back. Sorry for the harm, but not for the truth. Nobody saw her jet into a taxi. Day went on with a crispness I didn't recognize. Workshops ran, teams presented without jokes. At noon, the CEO pulled me into a small, beige curtain room, a folder on the table, my name on a document. It isn't a sanction, he said. It's an invitation. To what? To lead events permanently, to build processes that keep this from happening again. To stay. My hands stayed in my lap. The sacks next door practiced scales, again and again, like a phrase repeated until it's understood. I signed. I walked out. The small blue earring in my pocket weighed just enough to be mine. By afternoon, before buses ferried people back to the city, I returned the tech room key and asked for a copy of the hotel's maintenance account report. They wouldn't hand it over, but took my email. I walked down to the dock. The water was taut, tiny waves like the skin of someone who decides not to shiver. I sat on the edge, palms on warm wood. Rosa came without noise. She sat 2 planks away, elbow on knee. Sometimes you don't choose what you see. You only choose whether to do something. You did plenty, I said. You too. She lingered, stood. Before leaving, she spoke a thought that must have worked all night. The group audio wasn't an accident, but it wasn't only meanness either. Some people send signals so they don't lose their minds. Sometimes they turn the volume too high. I nodded. She left. I kept the earring in my pocket into the cloth bag where the scavenger hunt key had been and tied a simple knot. Back at the hotel, I filed forms, waved off buses, collected glasses. At 5, when the parking lot emptied, I sat on the front step and breathed like it was the first time. When the last vendor signed out, I walked up to cabin 12. It was bare, sheets tight, bed spread flat. I opened the window and let the ocean smell leave once and for all. I closed the now empty blue suitcase and left it aligned beside the closet for management to decide its fate. I turned off the lamp. I pressed my palm to the wall where the headboard had struck in the audio. The wood was cold, harmless.
I walked down the hill to the lot through afternoon light glued to the trees. Valentina waited in her car. I opened the door and sat, carrying in my pocket something so small it couldn't save or ruin anyone, but heavy enough to remind me. "Ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She pulled away slowly. In the rear view, the hotel shrank without disappearing. In the glove box, old maps and gum. I turned on the radio.